Good morning. I am Professor Sarjug Yadav, Department of Education in Social Science and Humanities at RIE-Ajmer. It gives me immense pleasure to welcome our two distinguished guests here to this studio. One is Professor A.K. Paliwal from Government College Kherwada. He is an eminent educationist and expert in ELT. And our next resource person, panelist, is Professor Sandhya Rani Sahu from National Council of Educational Research and Training, New Delhi. She has a vast experience of working in English language teaching, and she has also contributed in the development of NCERT textbooks and other materials. She has undertaken so many important research about ELT. So I am happy to welcome both of these experts here to this studio.
Thank you.
To have interaction with us on very important issues, which is English language teaching and learning outcomes. So, sir, both of you are welcome here to this studio.
Thank you, sir.
So, first of all, Professor Paliwal, I would like to just know from you. All of us know that language is very central in the entire school education, and without language no subject can be taught. It is very central in the entire scheme of education. So how do you look at language and how it is important for education as a whole?
Well, it's a very valid question you have asked, Professor Yadav. As you have already said that language is central to the system of education in general. Everybody knows that language is life. It is something that is our identity. We cannot live life without language. Even at home, when we interact with our family members, parents, cousins and brothers, and in society we come across a lot of people. So it is something that connects us with the family, with the society, with the world at large. And by being in connection with the family, we come to know about the world. We come to know how the people live and what they want to do, what they do. So we know, we get knowledge, we somehow develop ourselves linguistically, academically also, and cognitively also. So it helps us in growing as such as human beings. We help it helps us in such a way that use language as a tool. There is no other alternative. I mean, without language you cannot teach even science or mathematics or social sciences or anything for that matter. Everywhere you find language on the curriculum here. So this is a very significant component or integral part of the whole system of education.
Fine. You told that language is very essential, particularly in the field of education. We talk about mother tongue, we talk about second language. So how do you differentiate between the L1, L2, L3 like that?
All the people in the world of course are the native speakers of the language, because they acquire the language. It has been established over the years that we acquire the language and we do not learn the language. It's not something that is taught. It's learnt, it's acquired very naturally. It's something which is basic to our life. So it's something which is spontaneous, it is something inevitable. So we learn it in such a way that we do not know that we are learning it. So and that's the reason why we call it the first language or the acquisition of the first language. And since we are very sensitive about talking about the people around us, and we are very close to the mother right from the first moment we come to the world, we call it the mother tongue. So we learn the first language, the mother tongue, by being in close proximity with the mother and of course the family members. So we acquire it. We do not make any conscious effort to learn it. It's something which comes to us very naturally. And when it comes to talking about, let's say, a second language, and a second language is something which we have to learn, or it is something which is available for us for some educational purposes or some other purpose. So we become a bit conscious when we start learning it, and the exposure we get in the mother tongue the amount of exposure which we get in the mother tongue is of course not available in the same amount in the second language. So, therefore, there is a lot of difference. So, some linguists say that there is a lot of difference between acquisition and learning, though the new researches and studies reveal that of course even a second language is acquired if it is something made available to the learners by providing them with rich comprehensible input. So, the nature of the mother tongue differs from the nature of the second language. It may differ, it may not differ, it depends on where you are using the language. For example, if you are using a language belonging to the European family, then it is different. If you are teaching or learning a language which belongs to Asian context, then it is a different it has got a different nature.
Okay,
so
interesting.
that, yeah,
very
I can add,
interesting.
yes, please.
Yes, can
I
you
can add
just
a
say
point
something?
whatever Dr. Paliwal has said, that when we are teaching second language to the children, so the kind of exposure that the child gets while learning first language is not available.
Yeah.
So so in language learning a second language in the classroom, the teacher has to provide lot of exposure. More language exposure leads to more language learning.
Absolutely.
So the kind of strategy, the kind of activities, the kind of exercises the teacher is going to design, the focus is on giving language exposure to the
Exposure.
children.
Good. So, thank you. Actually, okay. Now we know that India is a multilingual country. We have so many languages in our country, but English assumes very significant place in our education system, and it is the gateway for social mobility or for better job. How do you look at English language teaching in our country?
Well, addressing this question directly is something which we need to keep in mind. Let us say, what is language first? Let us address the basic issue, the cardinal issue. What is language? What is language teaching? And then we can of course talk about English
Right.
language teaching. Everybody knows that language is communication. It is a system of communication. It is a vehicle through which we communicate ideas, feelings and emotions, everything. And language teaching is something that deals with this basic aspect of language. So, language is both content and expression. The content of language is essentially a set of sounds, a set of structures, a set of lexical items. So, language is something that involves sounds, and sounds produce words, which we call as lexis, and the lexis help us, the words, vocabulary items help us in constructing sentences, or structures help us in constructing sentences. So, you see that with the help of the sounds we have words, and with the help of words we have sentences, and we use those sentences in a very communicative setting, meaningful communicative setting, and they produce the intended impact. This is how we communicate ideas to the people, and so the idea gets across to the audience or the reader or somebody. So, language teaching means teaching the content of the language. Language teaching refers to the teaching of the language skills, which are listening, speaking, reading and writing, which are the fundamental, rudimentary, basic, essential skills which exist in every language. And if you look at the listening and speaking skills, they are the proper skills. You can live in the world without even acquiring the skills of reading and writing, because listening and speaking are the basic skills, and reading and writing are the literacy skills. So, they help us in knowing the world, in acquiring a lot of knowledge. So, language teaching, as you have rightly asked me, is something that deals with the learning of listening skill, learning of speaking skill, learning of reading skill and learning of writing skill. So, listening does not just mean listening something or hearing something. Listening means listening with understanding. Speaking does not mean just saying anything for that matter. Speaking at normal conversational speed in a meaningful manner in a communicative setting in order to achieve a particular speech act. So, you get the idea across the people, and people, you speak because they want to know something from you. And reading, which is also a comprehensive idea, it is a comprehension skill. So, we read and comprehend. Reading doesn't just mean recognizing the script or the word something. Reading means comprehension. Reading basically means comprehension or understanding. So, we come to know about various issues through reading, and writing is a productive skill. It's just like speaking. The only difference between reading and speaking and writing is that in the speaking you articulate the ideas or things by way of sounds and all that, and in writing you are just encoding those things in a form which is known as a script. So, you produce the idea. Of course, there are differences. So, language teaching means teaching those skills, and these skills need to be integrated. So, ultimately we have to aim at helping the learners developing communicative competence. So, language teaching means helping the learners to learn the skills of communication.
So skills are very important in
Yeah,
language.
of course.
Professor Paliwal, you have already talked about the different components of language as a whole. Now the question is that ELT is a very popular term in our country, and most of the educated people talk about ELT. So as a linguist, as a person from education background, pedagogical background, how do you look at ELT?
Well, ELT, as you have already said, that is a term which is very widely used. It is an umbrella term. It is something that stands for English language teaching, and it is something that also stands for English literature teaching. When we talk about ELT, we essentially talk about the teaching of the English language and the content of the English language. What is the content of the English language? The content of English language, like other languages, is the set of the basic sounds available in the language. We have the vowel sounds, we have the consonant sounds, we have the diphthongs. We also have to use the accent and the stress patterns available in the language, because it has got its special distinction of using stress, because it is stress timed language. It also has got certain patterns of intonation and rhythm. So, teaching of English means teaching of the pronunciation of English. In addition to it, the teaching of English means the teaching of the lexicon, the basic lexicon, the basic lexical items which the learners need to learn in order to use the language. So, the lexicon is also the content of the language. In addition to it, we have to teach a certain set of structures which are systematically selected and graded. So, structures are part and parcel of the language. So, teaching of English means the teaching the English structures, and they may be phonological structures, lexical structures, or semantic structures, or orthographic structures, or maybe morphological structures. So, it is structured at 5 levels. So, teaching of English means teaching the structures as we have just mentioned. Teaching of English also means the teaching of the language skills, the ability to listen to English and understand, the ability to understand the spoken English, the ability to speak so that other people may understand you, the ability to read and understand something that is printed in English, the ability to write and make other people understand what you are and what you want to say and communicate. So, teaching of English ELT refers to teaching the content of the language, the teaching of the basic language skills, and also developing in the learners the ability to communicate, which is usually called as communicative competence. So, these are the basic things we need to be fundamentally clear about when we talk about ELT. And of course, it also needs to be kept in view that ELT is referred to the teaching of English in the context where it is not the first language. So, it is always used as something which is the teaching of something as a second language.
Ma'am, you wanted to just supplement something regarding ELT. So,
I'd like
yes.
to add whatever
Yes,
Dr.
please.
Paliwal has said. He talked about the content of language. He talked about words and all these stress and sounds and
yes,
all that.
right.
But all these things can be taught through literature. Like in the beginning, he talked about it is ELT's language, it is teaching of literature. So, now in NCERT, the textbook that we have developed, we have taken this approach, this holistic approach. So, all these components that he referred to are not taught in isolation to children, it is integrated in the whole teaching
Absolutely.
learning process in
Right.
the classroom transactions. So, like when we are teaching a story to the children, when like communicative competence is being developed through that, through question answer, through the activities. So, this is like when we talk about holistic approach to language teaching, all these components are taken into account, so that children, like when they it is contextualized. So, it is contextual approach to language teaching, because we are not teaching anything in isolation.
Right.
So,
So you
all
mean
these
that
things are,
literature can be used as a resource to promote and develop all these kind of components regarding language?
so the course is called language through literature.
Yes.
Quite agreeable,
Ah,
because language
yes.
exists in literature, whether
Literature,
it is
ah,
oral
yes,
or
this
written.
is true.
So the material which you
very
get
good
for
supplement you have
learning
made.
or teaching essentially comes from literature,
Right.
which may be oral or written or both.
Yes. The next issue which I would like to raise here,
Yeah.
that as ma'am has also pointed out that literature can be used as a resource, and English language can be taught in as an integrated part of teaching learning process. Now the question is that we talk about different methods of English teaching as a second language. So Professor Paliwal, you please just throw some light on some of the important methods and approaches, and which approach or method you feel that it will be the most suitable one.
Well, it's a very tricky question, and it's honestly speaking very difficult to answer the question which would be the most appropriate method for teaching English in a particular context. But we could have a very holistic, comprehensive view of the idea of the thing, that what is your view of the language? How do you look at language? Do you hold a structural view? Do you hold a functional view, or do you hold a communicative view? Because the view itself determines the methodology you resort to using that. So if you hold a structural view, of course you teach English as a system of structures. You teach certain phonological structures, you teach certain lexical structures, you teach certain morphological structures, phonological, morphological, orthographic, semantic, everything put together. So you teach structures which are systematically selected and graded based on certain criteria, frequency and range and coverage and usability, teachability, and so on and so forth. But if you hold a functional view, that means why do you use a language? You use language in order to know something, in order to request somebody to do something for you, to get something done. That is what we call a functional view. If I want somebody to get a glass of water for me, I have many options available. I can order the person, I can request the person, I can persuade the person, and the language is something that operates, that helps you to function in a socially acceptable manner. So that is what we call a functional notional view. Besides these two views, we have another more constructive view of the language, social view of the language, that is communicative view of the language. If you look at language as communication, or language for communication, you appreciate the fact that language is something that helps us to communicate. So when you hold the communicative view, you focus more on developing the communicative competence or strategic competence. So you get something done by way of involving yourself, engaging yourself in a communicative activity. So the focus is on communication, not the focus has to be exclusively on the accuracy, as is the case with the structural view.
Right.
So when we talk of the methodology of teaching English as a second language, we have an array of a vast number of methods and approaches available. For example, we have the direct method, we have the structural approach, we have the communicative approach, we have the notional functional approach, we have the task based approach, we have the text based approach, and recently we have the constructivist approach to learning something. And we also have heard about the grammar method, the translation method, the grammar translation method, bilingual approach, bilingual method, the Dr. West reading method. We have lots of other methods and innovations which people have done, and they have of course contributed to the body of the language learning and teaching. But recently we have to appreciate the fact that all these approaches and methods have evolved. They are not against anything. they are an improvement upon the previous one. So, the recent approach, which is CLT, communicative language teaching, is at the moment is the approach which is very widely popularly used across the world, and we have to gradually shift our attention from accuracy to communication, which involves accuracy, appropriacy, fluency, which generates communicative competence. And I am happy to see that lots of books produced by NCERT and a state level also have got some components of CLT, but because of the system we have adopted, our focus is still largely on reading and writing. So, we need to evolve a system where the learners learn English as a communicative language rather than just a language for academic growth or something, which is of course a good goal, needs to be nurtured, needs to be helped, but we have to see to it that learners also learn how to communicate English, because we are living in the ICT era.
Yes, Dr. Paliwal has given a very comprehensive view about the different methods and approaches, and finally he concluded that communicative teaching learning is the approach which is very popular nowadays, because and no approach clashes with each other, they are just improving from the previous one. Do you like to just say something what Professor Paliwal has said?
I would like to add something to whatever Dr. Paliwal has said. In NCERT and in NCF 2005, we have talked about eclectic approach and integrated approach to language teaching. So, there is no particular approach like structural or direct or translation method or audiolingual. So, we are not taking anything particular, whatever is required for the class, because every child has a different need. So, it is need based approach. Suppose I go to a class and a child does not understand and like in a direct method, cannot learn through direct method. So, I can use a separate kind of method.
So,
we choose from different methods, because no method is wrong.
Right.
So, at a particular time they have their own validity. So, like in NCERT, in our textbooks also, that has been reflected that children, they learn in variety, their learning styles are different. So, depending on the learning styles, depending on the need of the children, so we can the approaches can be flexible. So, we have integrated all the approaches, whatever is suitable for a particular class. So, we call it eclectic or integrated approach that we have taken.
So, both of you are saying the same thing. Paliwal Sahab also told that.
I agree what she has just
finally
said.
Eclectic approach. It means that the best from each approach can be taken by the teacher, and the approach which works in the actual classroom situation.
Of course,
this is the best approach.
Yes.
So very good ideas came from both of you. And now the last question, Professor Paliwal, for you is because we teach our students in the classroom situation, and teaching also requires some materials, teaching learning materials. So, what are those materials which can be used as a resource, particularly in English language teaching?
We would like to have a broader view of teaching learning material, because narrowly defined it is something, a set of books and workbooks and something like that.
Yes, it should be.
So, teaching learning material is something that refers to audio text as well. It also involves visual text, which is books and all those things. It also refers to audio visual text, because they see and they hear and learn something, that is also learning material for the children. It also refers to the other languages available around the child as a resource, like the mother tongue available there, because we are teaching English as second language. So, and we are a multilingual country. And I think there is no country in the world which is monolingual today. All the countries are more or less multilingual or bilingual in some way or the other. So, children come to the school with a very rich repertoire, amount of exposure in the mother tongue. So, they know the mother tongue. So, mother tongue needs to be treated with respect. It should have a respectful place in the curriculum, in the teaching learning process there, but a word of caution is also important to be mentioned here, that it should not be replaced. I mean, mother should not be used consistently for teaching something. It should be used as a resource, because wherever the teachers find that they have failed in communicating the idea through the language, the target language, they have every liberty to go to the mother tongue, and the student also feel comfortable. So, it's something they come with. So, they have the ideas are there in the mother tongue. The only thing that the teacher needs to do in the second language is to help the learners in equipping themselves in such a way that they are able to communicate those ideas which are available in the mother tongue. So, that is the way they can use mother tongue as a resource. It should not just be a substitute for something, it should not be backdoor entry of the grammar translation method or something like that. So, we respect it, we should respect it, and it should find an honorable place in the classroom, but in a judicious manner. And adding to what Professor Sandhya ji had said 4 or 5 minutes back, that eclecticism is the answer to the question, and resource, mother tongue as a resource, is also a component of the eclecticism.
Well, Professor Sandhya, you wanted to share some of your views regarding teaching learning materials. So, what are your views about that?
I would just like to add something what Dr. Paliwal has said. Teaching learning material for ELT, he has given a very varied list of like audio visual and then only recording part and all, and he talked about like the stories in mother tongue. So, those could be used as resources. True. What I would like to add is that like there are authentic materials that we have talked about in our NCF 2005, that we can use authentic materials in the classroom as the learning resources, teaching learning materials for the children. For example, we can have newspaper as one of the resources. You can have recordings of like the great people, the speeches. You can have recordings of some recitations, some stories, those can be done also. And there are certain interviews that can also be used as resources, and there are certain articles that are there in the magazines and all. So, there are many different varieties of resources available outside the classroom. So, in NCF 2005 we talked about going beyond the textbook. So, there is, with the thematic similarity and all, we can bring in even translations, we can bring in from different research, from different languages. So, he talked about multilingualism, he talked about like bilingual approach,
MT as a resource, mother tongue as a
mother
resource.
tongue as a resource. So, in this like this multilingual resources, multilingualism is a resource, and the translations are also resources for our English language teaching. So, the children, they become sensitive to other languages, to other cultures, and they grow as a very like informed individual, and that is also part of the role that ELT plays in the classroom.
I would like to just mention here a fact that by authentic materials we mean the material which has not been primarily written for teaching purposes, something that has been written for other purpose, and you use it as such because it is real genuine language. So, this is what she refers to. I think is a valid point.
So, thank you. So, the last question now, once again, because it is related to ELT, because now we talk about assessment, that what is assessment and how we assess the competence of our students so far as language is concerned. So, how will you react?
Yeah, of course. The assessment of English as second language would of course depend on our view of the language. If the same view, if you have the structural view, you test structures. If you have the functional view, you test whether the students are able to function with the language properly or not. And if you have the communicative view, then you test the communicative competence of the learners. So, we need to have also the idea of involving eclecticism, as she has been referring for some time here, which is a valid idea. So, what do we want to test? Do we want to test the content of the language, vocabulary, pronunciation or something like that, or do we want to test whether the students are able to function with the language, whether they have the competence to use the functions properly or not, or whether they are able to communicate in the language both orally and in writing or not? That will determine the criteria for the assessment. So, what are we testing? Are we testing vocabulary? Are we testing structures? Are we testing grammar? Are we testing translation as a device for testing something or assessing something, or are we testing language itself as a communicative act, something like that? So, assessment is not just something which has to be treated in isolation. It has a direct linkage with our objectives and the methodology as well. So, the methodology of assessment should also be in sync with and in tune with the teaching learning process and the objectives we have set. So, if you treat it as a subject of knowledge, then you test the knowledge aspect. You go to the cognitive domain area and you test knowledge, comprehension, analysis, synthesis, evaluation, something like that. And if you focus on the affective domain, then you focus on the sensibilities of the things, of the material, something like that, or the learners. And if you focus on the skills which are listening, speaking, reading, right. I would like to just conclude by saying that you can learn listening by listening, speaking by speaking, reading by reading, and writing by writing, and this is how you can test. You can test listening only by listening, speaking only by speaking, reading only by reading, and writing only by writing, because they need to be tested at two platforms. Number one, at the platform of process, at the platform of product. So, what do they produce? Which is the outcome of the language, which is the performance of the learners, and I think Professor Sandhya Rani Ji Sahu is going to talk about the learning outcomes and should be in a better position to explain and throw more light on it. So, I would like her to
thank you Professor Paliwal, to conclude with very famous pronouncement what you have said, that now although you have touched upon all the different components of language teaching, including ELT, different approaches and methods. So, Professor Paliwal, now I would like to listen from you one final statement about language which can be relevant for our audience, for our students.
Well, we have a target, we have a goal, the goal of language teaching, and especially English language teaching. We teach students in such a way that they can understand the spoken English. We teach in such a way that they understand the printed English, and we also want them to speak so that others may understand, and we would also like them to write and communicate something. So, that the target is, the goal is set, the aim is set, the object is set. In order to achieve the goal, we have certain teaching learning situations and all that, and then we would like to test whether they have been able to learn of the language in a given prescribed form. This is what we call an achievement test, and how much of the given course do they know, how much of the given language do they know, that is a proficiency test, and how much of the given course have they not been able to learn, that is what we know as diagnostic test, and how much of the language do they require to learn in future, and would they be able to learn that or not, is what we call a prognostic test. I think what Professor Sahu has argued for some time here is the fact that learners need to be tested on the scale of competencies, and competencies in a way are something which help us to give an idea about whether the learners have been able to learn the language or not, whether they are able to use the language or not. Ultimately, all these outcomes help the teacher as assessors, as tester, as evaluators in rethinking about the set goals and the teaching learning processes. So, she is absolutely right in saying that this is a document containing rich ideas, vital ideas about how to make teaching learning process more meaningful, more contextual, and more fruitful. I think this is the message that we should give to the teachers who are going to be the trainers as well as the users of the language with the learners. And if we have the clarity about the objectives, about the teaching learning processes, and of course about the assessment devices to be used, we would be in a way able to achieve the goal for that, and this is the real thing we should be concerned about.
Wonderful, Professor Paliwal, you have really mm, just gave us some very panoramic view about that how language is important, how it can be learned, how teaching learning materials are important. So everything whatever you told, it is very illuminating for our students, for our teachers.
Thank you.
And if those components which have been actually stated by both of you are wonderful, they will be very wonderful ideas, and if they adopt in their practical life in teaching learning process, I believe that it will help them to go a long way, and it will serve our purpose of quality education, about which both of you emphasized that unless and until students learn, our teaching is of no use.
Yeah.
So I am really very thankful that both of you came over here and you have spared your valuable time, and you did a wonderful job. So once again, our RI is grateful to both of you for this wonderful contribution.
Thanks very
Thank
much.
you very much.
Thank you so much.
Welcome.